There is a document sitting in a government office somewhere in London, a small burgundy booklet, ordinary in appearance, and yet that document, a British passport, became the unlikely centre of one of the most quietly significant royal battles of recent years, a battle not fought in courtrooms or in front of cameras, but in letters, in delays, in silences that lasted 5 months when they should have lasted 3 weeks. And at the heart of it, 2 children, a boy and a girl, who live in California, who have never sat on a throne, who have never worn a crown, who do not yet fully understand what their names mean to the people fighting over them. If you have been following this story and feel like something important is not being said out loud, you are right. And that is exactly what we are going to talk about today. If you find this kind of honest, careful reporting useful, it would mean a great deal if you stayed with this channel. There are more conversations like this one coming. Now let us go back to the beginning, because to understand where Archie and Lilibet stand today, you have to understand how they got their titles in the first place and why the story of those titles has never been as simple as it was presented. When Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor was born in May 2019, his parents made a quiet announcement. He would not be using a royal title. He would simply be Master Archie. At the time, this was framed publicly as a personal choice. Harry and Meghan, the narrative went, wanted a more normal life for their son, and many people accepted that explanation. But 2 years later, in that extraordinary conversation with Oprah Winfrey, Meghan said something that landed very differently. She described a conversation during her pregnancy, a conversation she said involved concerns being raised within the institution about how dark their child's skin might be. She also said that the convention she had understood, that Archie would automatically become a prince when Charles became king, had, in her words, been under discussion, that there were conversations about changing the rules specifically for her children. Buckingham Palace denied any intention to change the letters patent, and that is the document that matters here. The 1917 letters patent, issued by King George V, establishes which members of the royal family are entitled to the style of prince or princess. Under those rules, the grandchildren of the sovereign through the male line automatically hold that entitlement, which means that the moment King Charles III ascended the throne in September 2022, Archie and Lilibet became automatically and by birthright Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet. A spokesperson for the Sussexes confirmed it plainly at the time of Lilibet's christening in 2023. The children's titles, they said, had been a birthright since their grandfather became monarch. The matter had been settled in alignment with Buckingham Palace. Settled. That word was chosen deliberately, because from the Sussex side of this story, this had not always felt settled at all. And then came the passports. According to a detailed report in The Guardian published in the summer of 2025, Harry and Meghan applied for British passports for Archie and Lilibet, documents that would reflect the family surname Sussex and include the HRH styling that became their children's legal birthright. A standard British passport application takes approximately 3 weeks to process. The Sussex children waited 5 months. They were told there were technical issues. They reapplied using an expedited 24-hour service. The appointment was cancelled. A legal letter was eventually sent to the Home Office, reportedly threatening a data access request that could have exposed internal communications. Days after that letter was sent, the passports were issued. Now, Buckingham Palace denied that King Charles or any palace aide was involved in those delays. A palace spokesperson, when asked directly, said simply, no. A further statement noted that King Charles, managing a cancer diagnosis and the duties of an entire monarchy, had better things to do than concern himself with passport applications. That denial is important, and it is worth taking seriously. Bureaucratic delays happen, government offices make errors, and it is genuinely possible that what felt, from Harry and Meghan's perspective, like deliberate obstruction was in fact institutional slowness with no malicious intent behind it. But here is what nobody talked about very much at the time. According to the Guardian's source, described as close to the Sussex family, one of the reasons for the apparent reluctance was this: King Charles had not wanted Archie and Lilibet to carry the HRH titles, and the passport, once issued, would become the first and perhaps the only legal documentation formally recording their names in full. So the passport was not just a travel document, it was a record, permanent, verifiable, a piece of paper that said in plain English, these children are His Royal Highness and Her Royal Highness. And the source added one more detail that has stayed with me. Harry had reportedly become so frustrated with the delays that he consulted his uncle, his mother's brother, Charles Spencer, about the possibility of the children using Spencer as their surname instead of Sussex, not as a preference, as a contingency. If the institution would not recognize his children's legal names, he would use a name the institution could not control.
That is not the behavior of a man playing public relations games. That is the behavior of a father who felt the wall closing in. And this is the part where we need to pause, because there are two completely legitimate ways to read everything I have just told you, and both of them deserve your consideration. Over quiet resolution, that the passport story, including its very convenient leak to The Guardian at a politically sensitive moment, served their narrative of ongoing institutional persecution, that the HRH titles matter to them not for their children's protection, as they have claimed, but for their own brand, because a prince and princess in Montecito are more interesting commercially and publicly than two private children with a family surname. This reading is not unreasonable. It is worth holding. The second reading is one that some people are reluctant to say directly, that a mixed-race family, carrying a name that the institution has complicated feelings about, found that the ordinary administrative machinery of the British state moved differently for their children than it would for others, that the discomfort around the HRH titles was not about constitutional tidiness, that it was about something older and more uncomfortable than that. This reading is also not unreasonable, and it is also worth holding. The honest answer is that we do not know which reading is correct. Possibly both contain truth, possibly neither does entirely. What we do know, from documented reporting, from named spokespeople, from palace statements, is that a 6-month delay happened, that the passports were ultimately issued, and that the titles remain intact, for now. Because now the conversation has moved forward in time, and what lies ahead for Archie and Lilibet may be even more significant than anything that has already happened. Royal editor Emily Andrews, writing in Woman and Home magazine in April 2026, was direct. To her, she wrote, "It was obvious. When William becomes king, he will at the very least strip Archie and Lilibet of their prince and princess titles." That phrase, "at the very least," is doing a great deal of work, because it implies there may be more to come. Harry and Meghan's own Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles could follow. Royal author Tom Bower, in his biography Betrayal, made a similar prediction. William, he wrote, would undoubtedly rail against what he saw as disloyalty. He might even strip Archie and Lilibet of their titles. Royal correspondent Tom Sykes has reported that William has been quietly briefing, signalling his intentions, building his case, for some time, and there is a precedent William could point to that nobody would have expected even 5 years ago. In late 2025, King Charles removed the royal style, titles and honours of his younger brother Andrew. It was a step that once would have seemed constitutionally extraordinary. Now it has happened. The ground has shifted. William, it is widely reported, admires the Danish model. In 2022, Queen Margrethe of Denmark removed princely titles from 4 of her grandchildren. Her reasoning was institutional efficiency, a streamlined monarchy for a modern age. The decision caused pain within the family, but it was done. William is said to have studied that decision with interest. Here is something worth knowing, though, something that gets lost in the noise of all these expert predictions.
According to Debrett's, the authority on British peerage and titles, the only way a formal peerage can be removed from a title holder is by an Act of Parliament. In practice, Debrett's notes, this is unlikely to happen. What a future King William could do is issue a new letters patent that redefines which family members are entitled to use the styles of prince and princess. He could also, more quietly, simply ask that the children stop using their HRH styling in public life, as Queen Elizabeth asked Harry and Meghan to do with their own HRH titles in 2020. A request is not a law, but when it comes from the monarch, the distinction is largely theoretical. And here is the human truth at the centre of all of this, the part that I think matters most. Archie is 7 years old, Lilibet is 4. They did not choose any of this. They did not ask to be born into one of the most scrutinized families on earth. They did not ask for titles, or for the complications those titles carry, or for the fact that their names have become a proxy for arguments about race and tradition and institutional power and what the British monarchy is allowed to become. They are children, growing up in California, going to school, learning to ride bikes, living a life that is, by all accounts, remarkably normal given the extraordinary circumstances of their birth. Harry has said publicly, through sources and statements, that he wants his children to keep their titles so that when they are old enough, they can decide for themselves whether they want to become working royals or remain private individuals. That is not an unreasonable position for a parent. It is, in fact, a very recognizable one. The desire to leave a door open for your child, to not close options before they are old enough to choose. Whether that door remains open will not be decided by Harry. It will be decided by a man who, by multiple accounts, has not yet met his niece Lilibet in person, who has not spoken publicly to his brother in over 2 years, who is, whatever his other qualities, navigating a relationship with his sibling that appears to have broken down in ways that go beyond royal protocol into something rawer and more personal than that. So what does the royal family's final decision on Archie and Lilibet actually look like right now in 2026? The honest answer is that no final decision has been made, not formally, not legally. King Charles has not issued new letters patent removing their entitlements. William has not ascended the throne. The titles remain. The passports were issued. The children are, by every current legal measure, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet. But something has shifted, and everyone who follows this story closely can feel it. The direction of travel is clearer than it has ever been. The precedent set by Andrew's stripping of titles exists now in a way it did not before. The expert commentary has moved from speculation to something that feels closer to quiet certainty. And underneath all of the constitutional language, the letters patent and the peerage law and the slimmed-down monarchy plans, there are 2 parents in California trying to protect something for their children, and there is an institution in London that is trying to define what it is allowed to become. Those 2 things are not necessarily incompatible, but they have not yet found a way to exist peacefully alongside each other. Perhaps they will. Perhaps there is a version of this story where the brothers find their way back to each other, where the children grow up knowing both their California life and their British heritage, where titles become less important than relationships. It is not an impossible ending.
But it requires something that has been in short supply in this family for several years now. A conversation that nobody is having in public. And perhaps that is the thing worth sitting with, not the titles themselves, not the legal mechanisms, but the silence between two brothers and what it might mean for two children who deserve, whatever their names, to simply be loved by their whole family. What does it say about an institution when its most urgent, unresolved questions involve the names on a child's passport? Leave your thoughts below. These conversations matter, and so does your perspective.